Afghanistan falls to the Taliban after the U.S. withdraws. Whose fault is this? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect yourself whenever you go online. So, a lot has changed since the last time I talked about the Taliban, which was only on Saturday. At the time, I told you the Taliban had taken control of half the country's provinces. Well, by the end of Sunday, they had taken Kabul, the nation's capital. Basically, Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban. At this pace, by the next time I talk about the Taliban, they'll have taken over Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Narnia. 3 places most Americans can't find on a map. But first, a quick recap of the Taliban in case you've been living in a cave, like the Taliban did, before they took over the country and now they have nice digs. The Taliban is a coalition of Islamic extremists who took over Afghanistan in 1996. According to the U.S. State Department in 2001, the takeover followed over 20 years of civil war and political instability. Initially, some hoped that the Taliban would provide stability to the country. However, it soon imposed a strict and oppressive order based on its misinterpretation of Islamic law. Hoped it would make the situation more stable, but it just resulted in more chaos. Just like my stepdad, Terry. You're not my real dad, Taliban. But after the September 11th attacks carried out by Saudi Arabians, the U.S. said al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden was responsible. I know that doesn't sound like a Taliban thing, but trust me, the Taliban are the bad guys. They were harboring bin Laden in Afghanistan, which maybe they were. A U.S. operation in December 2001 tried to capture bin Laden in his cave hideout in Tora Bora. They did not catch him. Bin Laden was real slippery. He probably used some of that Middle Eastern oil that the U.S. definitely had no interest in. But the assault did result in a few hundred deaths and the eventual escape of bin Laden, who is thought to have left for Pakistan on horseback, which sounds like the cover image to the worst romance novel of all time. Then, finally, 10 years later, Obama's team found bin Laden hiding in Pakistan and killed him. Joe Biden remembers. He was there that day. And so was Hillary Clinton. Bin Laden is the one death conspiracy theorists don't blame her for. And that was the end of the war in Afghanistan. Except it wasn't. The U.S. continued to keep troops in Afghanistan, which I know is a different country from Saudi Arabia, where the 9/11 attackers were from, and also a different country from Pakistan, where bin Laden was hiding. But it's basically all the same place, right, President Bush? We're lucky he didn't send troops to Narnia. But the point is, U.S. troops stayed in Afghanistan, supposedly to keep the Taliban at bay. The U.S. has spent more than $2 trillion rebuilding the Afghan government and training its military. But the Taliban is like the ghost from Super Mario. It stays in place while you're looking at it, but the second you turn your back, it swoops in and attacks. Many Americans questioned why we continued spending so much time and resources on Afghanistan, and they put pressure on many U.S. presidents to withdraw. In February 2020, Trump negotiated a plan with the Taliban. Trump's agreement was to withdraw troops in May 2021. But then, to Trump's disbelief, he did not win re-election. It was unclear at the time whether Biden would continue the agreement. But President Biden also wanted to withdraw, but set a new deadline of September 11th, 2021.
I believed that our presence in Afghanistan should be focused on the reason we went in the first place, to ensure Afghanistan would not be used as a base from which to attack our homeland again. We did that. We accomplished that objective. We delivered justice to bin Laden a decade ago, and we've stayed in Afghanistan for a decade since. Since then, our reasons for remaining in Afghanistan have become increasingly unclear, with the terror threat now in many places. Keeping thousands of troops grounded and concentrated in just one country at a cost of billions each year makes little sense to me and to our leaders. We cannot continue the cycle of extending or expanding our military presence in Afghanistan, hoping to create ideal conditions for the withdrawal and expecting a different result. I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th.
What's it called when you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results? Oh yeah, U.S. foreign policy. Critics say the U.S. needed to stay in Afghanistan longer, but Biden replied saying 1 more year or 5 more years of U.S. military presence would not have made a difference if the Afghan military cannot or will not hold its own country. And so the U.S. began to withdraw. And like the Mario Brothers ghost, the Taliban struck. On Sunday, the Afghan president fled the country, and the Taliban forces entered the capital, essentially completing their takeover of the country. They even posed for a family photo inside the presidential palace, to make sure it would trend on Instagram. It's a promo for their new MTV show, Cribs, OPP, Other People's Palaces. So how did the Taliban take over the country so fast? More after the break. Welcome back. Everyone knew the Taliban would try to take Afghanistan back. But what shocked many people was how fast they did it. They took over an entire country faster than it takes some people to get a fiancé. And if you think the forced marriages on that show are bad, wait until you see the Taliban's. In April, Biden had announced U.S. troops would withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11th or earlier. In May, the Taliban launched a major offensive in the south. Then in June, the Taliban launched a series of attacks in the north. It gave them control of the border crossing with Tajikistan. In early July, U.S. troops left Bagram Air Base. This was done without even notifying the Afghans. It was a real Irish exit, meaning the person who authorized this had to have been drunk at the time. By late July, the Taliban controlled about half of the country's districts. Then, things fell even quicker. Last Saturday, the Taliban took the last remaining government stronghold of Mazar-e-Sharif. And by early morning Sunday, the Taliban had reached the government-controlled city of Jalalabad, where officials surrendered without firing a single shot. It was a real French goodbye, meaning, you get it. Just miles away from Kabul, the Taliban captured Bagram Air Base and released thousands of prisoners, including many senior al-Qaeda operatives. And within hours of the attack on Kabul, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. If you think he's abandoning his people, don't worry. He left a heartfelt Facebook post saying how hard of a choice it was for him. The Afghans' hearts really bleed for him. Wait, sorry, I said that wrong. The Afghans' hearts are bleeding because of him. Many Afghans are afraid the Taliban will implement Sharia law.
A lot of people are concerned that if the Taliban takes power again, women's rights will move backwards. How can you guarantee that women's rights will be protected?
We assure this to people all over the world, especially the people of Afghanistan. Islam has given rights to everyone equally. Women have their own rights. How much Islam has given rights to women, we will give them that much.
Yeah, seems like they'll have plenty of rights. On the bright side, they're not going to spread COVID this way because they're forbidden from leaving the house. But surprisingly, a lot of people are desperate to leave.
The Kabul airport is the only safe way out of Afghanistan, and today there was nearly a run on it. Afghans who could get visas rushed to foreign countries. For the United States, the airport is the staging ground to evacuate U.S. Embassy personnel. Helicopters and airplanes circled over Kabul, shuttling between the embassy, where sensitive documents were burned, and the airport as the Taliban closed in.
I haven't seen people so desperate to flee a terrible situation since the last time I went to a Limp Bizkit concert. The U.S. State Department reported the Kabul airport was taking fire and instructed U.S. citizens to shelter in place. Even after the airport reopened to commercial flights, many Americans and Afghans seeking to flee said they were turned away and told flights had been canceled. And that wasn't even because of the conflict. It was because they were flying Spirit Airlines. Some people were so desperate to get out, they clung onto the outside of planes as they took off and fell to their deaths, which is horrible. And also, the new economy class on Spirit Airlines, you have to pay extra for a seat inside the plane. So, as this disaster unfolds, how is the U.S. getting people out of Afghanistan? Officials said they hoped the Taliban would allow them to continue flights over the next several days. Relying on the goodwill of the Taliban is a plan. Biden also sent 1,000 troops as security at Kabul International Airport. This is in addition to the 5,000 U.S. troops he sent earlier. The Taliban claims to await a peaceful transfer of power, which is to say the Taliban won't hurt anyone unless they resist. Not sure this is the type of peace in the Middle East everyone was hoping for. All this is bringing a lot of heat on Biden. More after the break. Welcome back. Many on the left and right blame Biden for the debacle in Afghanistan. Republicans are calling this Biden's Saigon moment, a reference to the botched pullout of the Vietnam War. Secretary of State Antony Blinken denies this.
This is manifestly not Saigon.
Yeah, learn your geography, dummies. Unless you're talking about history, then yeah, this is Saigon all the way. Even some Democrats can't help but see the similarities. And Afghanistan's first, and probably last, female ambassador to the U.S. thinks the situation was avoidable. She called it a failure of international aid and assistance. To this, the Taliban responded, "Hey, who taught this woman how to read?" Biden gave a televised speech on Monday to defend what happened.
If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
But the issue isn't whether the U.S. should have pulled out of Afghanistan, it's how it was done. And the pullout debacle is not something you can just blame on the Afghan forces. U.S. intelligence was woefully unprepared. This is what Biden said just 6 weeks ago.
But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Like Mickey Rourke, that statement aged poorly.
There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy in the...
You can actually hear the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme playing right now, can't you? So was this a massive intelligence failure? Or was Biden actually lying at the time to justify moving ahead with troops pulling out? Well, either way, it's not good. It's not just about U.S. officials badly predicting how quickly things would change. The Biden administration did too little, too late to rescue the Afghans who had helped the U.S. military, like interpreters. The Biden administration failed to heed the warnings on Afghanistan, failed to act with urgency, and its failure has left tens of thousands of Afghans to a terrible fate. There's no way the U.S. president and intelligence community couldn't have seen this coming. I saw this coming, and I'm just a host of a small YouTube show that makes way too many Super Mario references. Even if the Biden administration didn't know if or when the Taliban would take over, they could have at least had a good rescue plan in place. They did not. For months, members of Congress and advocates in refugee, veteran, and human rights organizations have been urging the Biden administration to evacuate America's Afghan allies on an emergency basis. For months, dire warnings have appeared in the press. And yet, Biden just sacrificed them like a Yoshi. I have a problem, people. So, is leaving so many of Afghanistan's citizens to a terrible fate Biden's fault? Of course not. According to Biden, it's actually Donald Trump's fault. You see, Biden simply inherited a deal cut by his predecessor. The White House says it was Trump who left the Taliban in the strongest position since 2001, imposed a deadline on U.S. forces to leave, and shrunk the armed forces down to 2,500 men. So you see, Biden had to either follow through on Trump's plan or do something different and better. Instead, he chose a third option, a diplomatic train wreck. Sorry, a diplomatic plane wreck. This was a real American goodbye. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. It's a VPN that lets you protect your identity. When you go online, especially in an authoritarian country like China, or as of this week, Afghanistan, you need to be using a VPN like Surfshark to protect your identity. Every time you write an online comment or send an email or go onto Facebook, governments and your internet service provider can see what you're doing. And that's scary, especially if you're in a country ruled by these guys. I mean these guys. So whenever you go online, you should be using Surfshark to protect yourself. So if you need a VPN, and trust me, you do, check out Surfshark. Try it out with our special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. Go to surfshark.com/uncovered. For just $2.21 a month, you can get Surfshark on all your devices. So click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.